Uh, Thank you, Brad, and thanks to everybody at Skookum for having me here. This is a really cool opportunity for us to kind of talk about what we do and how we do it, and all the different ways that immersive content comes into play when you're thinking about content or thinking about telling stories or creating experiences and stuff like that. So we'll get started and talk really high level about what immersive is, what it means, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into like why it's important to think about it and all the different things that it's eventually going to sort of impact. And then we'll get into some examples of projects that we've done and how we did them, and wrap up with just like, here's where I think it's going and the future of content and storytelling. So for starters, what is it? So many people don't know what the hell immersive is. You say it and they're just like, yeah, and they act like they're interested and act like they know because they don't want to not know. And so then it's like, do you really understand what it is? And a lot of conversations that we've had with people, they've come to us and they're like, oh, we want to do VR. And it's like, great. Why? Why do you want to do VR? Does it make sense to do VR? Why are you trying to use this technology? In what ways does it make sense for your brand, for whatever story you're trying to tell? We go in and try and help people figure that out. And then we also try and figure it out and then take it to people and say, hey, we think you have an opportunity to do something like this. Do you want to talk about it and figure it out? So what it is a number of different things. We'll start at the top with some of the things that are probably most relevant right now as far as buzzwords and culture. But augmented reality is really at the top of the list right now of everybody's sort of, we got to check this out or try it out or look into it or understand it. And the way that we break augmented reality down is by type of content, where the content lives, and then how it's consumed. So in thinking of those things, you start to dial in exactly how you can use it and how other people can enjoy it and experience it. So as far as the types of augmented reality content, we're talking about two very simple things. Is it interactive or is it passive? Is it something that I just watch, or is it something that I can touch and it will respond to me? So once you figure out the passive or interactive space, then you can move into where the content could potentially live. And that's when you start to get into the weeds a little bit more of what type of platform we'd be using. Is it living on a browser in web AR? Is it living on an app inside of a native app, or do we need to build a custom app for this? Or can it live inside of an existing platform? Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook are all big proponents of AR, and not just the selfie cam anymore. You can actually use the back camera on phones to drop objects, to drop characters, to drop people into a space and augment your reality through those existing apps. All three of those have open source platforms that you can go and build content for their platform. So, and I'll show those at the end, just what those resources are, but you have access to them today. You can go home and start playing around with Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook. And then you have to think about how it's consumed. How are people actually going to consume this content? Are we targeting to this experience to people that are going to be on a phone? Are they going to be using some sort of installation with holograms where something might be projected? Or is this a high-end consumer that's going to be someone who's an early adopter with maybe a HoloLens or the Magic Leap glasses? And there's a picture of those down at the bottom. They're extremely small. So just go Google those, you'll find them. The next piece of this is the two main types of content. And augmented reality is the type of content that comes to you. So that's the first thing, is content that comes to you is augmented. Content that you go into is virtual. So those are really the two, at a high level, those are the two types of content that we're talking about. So augmented reality is that content that comes to you. Virtual reality is the kind of content you go into. So going into virtual reality, it's the same type of thing. Is it a passive experience? Is it an interactive experience? Where does it live? Is it in an app, or does it live inside of a specific headset ecosystem? Things like Oculus and Vive and PlayStation, those are ecosystems for specific devices. So when you're building, are you targeting the PlayStation community, or are you targeting the Vive community? So you have to think about that stuff before you even start thinking about what type of story you're going to tell, or what the purpose of the content is. and again, how it's consumed. So virtual reality can fall into mobile through mobile apps, but then you also have headsets, and the headsets are just exploding right now as far as how they're progressing and how much easier they are to use, as well as how many people are starting to build headsets. There's a number of other companies that aren't on this list that are developing headsets or that have announced headsets, some of them wireless, some of them wired, some of them look absolutely ridiculous, and I'm not sure anyone will ever put them on their heads. But when you're thinking about VR headsets, you essentially have two categories there. You have a high-end and a low-end headset. So your high-end is going to be your $1,500, $2,000 computer that's hooked up to a Vive that has sensors hanging from the ceiling with 2 hand controls, and you can only go so far. Or you might have to set up some kind of wired rigging so that you can move about a space and move around. And it's cumbersome. It's a lot of work. So does it make sense to build an experience in VR if that's what it takes to actually show people? And then you have the other layer of how many people can actually experience this at one time. If you have an investment of $3,000 to $4,000 in hardware costs just to experience the piece of content that only one person can see and interact with, how many times do you have to multiply that in order to get it to a point that it's scalable and actually has an impact? So another thing to think about. On the low end of the headsets, you have the Google Daydream, which is really just a Google phone, a Pixel, dropped into a headset that has a little Bluetooth controller. So Google is essentially removing the barrier of entry into a device that you already have. And you just drop it into a plastic headset and you hit go. The other one's Samsung Gear VR. It's the same type of concept. Drop your phone into a headset and you can go. And then Oculus Go, which is the latest headset to hit the market, comes in around $200 for a completely self-contained headset with no wires. You don't have to have headphones. It has a controller, just one. It doesn't have the Vive thing, but it's the first time that a headset is actually attainable and very easy to use, and you can still hear the world around you, so you can hear if somebody's trying to mess with you while you have a headset on. So you're not completely cut off from the world. And everyone at Wheelhouse has been playing with the Oculus Go to the point where we've actually had to start putting limitations on how often people play with the headsets because we're not getting our work done. So it's the first time that we at Wheelhouse have felt confident that a headset can actually be used at a scalable rate. It's something that you can buy 10 or 20 of these and have them at an event, and the overhead is not nearly as high. And suddenly you have multiple people that can just walk up, put on a headset and look around, put it down. There's not all these wires. There's not a huge computer to deal with. It's very easy. I'll hit you up at the end.
That's fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's VR. So we've got AR, we've got VR. Content you go into, content that comes to you. The next level of this, and I'll have to be very specific here, but there is a difference between virtual reality and 360 content. And the difference is virtual reality is rendered in the headset live, just like a video game is. So 360 content is pre-rendered, which means it's basically just a rendered video, like you would pull up on YouTube and hit play with. It's not rendering content live. So it's things that everything's pre-baked. But with 360 content, you have a lot of similar things happening. For starters, it's always going to be passive. 360 video is not an interactive experience because it's all pre-rendered. But there are two main sticking points with 360 content, and that is what's actually interesting. If I can't interact with this, and if it's always going to be passive, how am I what's my reward for being engaged with this? And the two things that have really come out over the past 5 to 10 years of playing with 360 content is content that is empathetic and content that has a high level of energy gets viewers engaged. Anything outside of that, it falls off a cliff. So again, it's one of those things you have to think about when you want to do this type of content. Are we doing something that's empathetic or energetic? And if we're not, maybe this isn't the right solution. 360 content does live in a lot more spaces. It's much more available than AR or VR because it can live in a web browser. It can live natively on a device, so you could download it to your phone and take it with you wherever you go. Not necessarily need a cell connection or Wi-Fi to view a video. It can live inside of apps. So and that's one of the projects that I'll touch on later, is we can actually take these 360 videos, package them into an app, and suddenly you've got a whole library of content that you can access. And then existing platforms. You have YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook Video. All those platforms can support 360 video. Suddenly, 360 content becomes very, very attainable, not only for people that want to use it, but for the consumer that you want to engage with. Suddenly, a 360 video is something you can put out on a social media channel and reach people in different ways. So that's where 360 content sort of has a slight leg up, is just the level at which it's available. And then how it's consumed, very similar to VR, through mobile devices, VR headsets, with the added benefit of just a web browser, either desktop or mobile. So environmental is sort of stepping back from the headsets, from the mobile phones, from sort of the traditional idea of immersive content. Environmental content is content that exists around you, and most importantly, it's a shared physical space. So if you could imagine this room, and you have all these walls projection mapped, and you have content playing on all the surfaces, suddenly you're in an augmented space. You're in a space that maybe you're not looking at it through your phone, but it's still augmenting content throughout the physical space. So what types of content? Again, is it passive or interactive? You can just sit back and watch, or we have ways that you can interact with it physically. It lives on large format displays, so think of Times Square. Times Square would be a great example of environmental immersive experiences. If someone, whoever's the first to do this wins, but if someone takes over every screen in Times Square for any type of event, that's going to be the most talked about thing for a long time in the immersive space, because you didn't have to do anything for the consumer to get it. You just put it up on a screen, but suddenly they are completely surrounded. They're immersed in content. And then projection mapping. Projection mapping is what I just described, sort of mapping content onto existing physical surfaces. And then how it's consumed. It's consumed in person, which is great. And it's shared, which makes it even better, because then you can sit there with your friends and you can talk about it, and you can be social with it. You can talk to the content. You can have something to talk about amongst each other, where in the virtual and AR spaces, we're not quite there yet. No, it will get there, but it's what makes environmental so special right now. So here's an example. The bottom left is, you've probably seen architectural projections. Those are very common nowadays. It's something that just has immense impact when you're standing in front of a structure and it completely changes face, and you didn't have to do anything. It really is magical when that happens. And then the NBA uses it a lot on basketball courts. And you've probably seen that too on YouTube or something like that, where suddenly the basketball court falls away and there's this cavernous hole underneath it, and then all these things are happening. That's all just projection mapping. And it's just a projector and some clever angles, and that's all there is to it. Again, user doesn't have to do anything. So mixed reality is the last one. And what's really cool about mixed reality is it's a blend of all of those things in a number of different ways, plus the added layer of real physical interaction with something in your physical space. So it's not just, we've got the guy over here on the left who's kind of in this VR rig where you can literally run around and jump like you're inside of the video game, and look somewhat ridiculous doing it. But then you've got, so yeah, this guy's jumping, he's running, he's physically engaging with the content, which is just unreal. And on the other side of this, and the image is a little dark, but this is a project that Intel partnered with another content company to work with and develop this. I'm not even kidding. It's a virtual reality go-kart track where you put on a headset and drive a go-kart around a real track, a real go-kart, but you can't see your physical space. You can only see the track inside of VR. And suddenly, we can all really actually play Mario Kart. Like, it's real. It's a real thing now. And I cannot wait for that to come to Charlotte. I don't know who's going to do it, but I'll be the first in line. So those are all of the things that kind of wrap up immersive content, and there are so many layers and details inside of each one of those that I've not really gone into. But at a high level, that's it. That gives you an idea of what we're thinking about, how we're thinking about it, and how to use it. And the reason it's important is because the market is growing at an unbelievable rate. In 2016, the AR and VR market was at $6.1 billion, which doesn't seem like it's that much in the sense of like, we hear Apple reaching $1 trillion valuation or Amazon hitting $1 trillion valuation. It's a lot of money. The thing is that AR and VR has not been around that long. And Apple only recently opened up ARKit to developers. So, and that was in 2017. So you're looking at a market that really has started to evolve without your major tech players being involved. So last year, the market more than doubled. So Apple comes out with ARKit. Suddenly it becomes available to everyone on the planet that has an iPhone. Google releases their AR development kit. Suddenly everybody with an Android phone can get into AR. And then we start to hear rumors of devices and things like that. Within the next few years, by 2021, the VR market, AR market, is estimated to hit $108 billion. So that's a pretty remarkable jump in the next 3 years to go from 14 billion to 108. And the outlook beyond that is even greater because as the technology evolves, it becomes more available. As it becomes more available, more people adopt it. And as more people adopt it, more people start to create for it. There's a trend there. And we've seen this happen before. We've seen it happen with film. We've seen it happen with cell phones. It's the same thing happening again, just in a different content space. The benefit to AR, VR, all this immersive content is it's limitless. It is absolutely limitless. There's no finite number of digital experiences you can create. You can just keep going. So that's what's more exciting about it than anything else, is that the content space is truly unlimited, and the ability to create content is getting easier and easier and easier. So where is it going to go? Where is this money sort of getting dumped into, and what industries is it going to impact? First and foremost, aerospace and defense, they're already using AR and VR for training. The military is starting to adopt it. I think the Air Force last year released a game for video gamers to go in and play a game based on what it's like to be in the Air Force. And it was an actual training piece of content that they developed to recruit people. So now all of a sudden you have the Air Force making a video game to recruit people to come and enlist in the Air Force. And that's not only unbelievable to think about as far as content goes, but just from a marketing and an advertising perspective, suddenly you are creating content for people to engage with that they're actually going to want to engage with. And then there's a benefit to that of them being an advocate of whatever it is they've engaged with. Education is a big one. AR flashcards are really, really cool. There's an example where you have essentially two cards that have an O and one that has an H, and through the app you put them together and it creates water. So you suddenly have the ability to illustrate different concepts through augmented reality, building on top of the physical. And you can also do things in K through 12, like take kids to places that they've never been before. Get them out of their classroom, get them into environments that maybe they otherwise never would have the opportunity in their life to see. And so then you can start to educate them better. This is where the empathy and energy piece really comes into play, especially if you could show a child what the Earth could look like in 50 years if we don't step in and do something about climate control, climate change. So suddenly you can start to have an impact on people without having to do this big grandiose campaign and push all this stuff and spend all this money and put all this effort behind it. You can have a video that lives on YouTube that a teacher can pull up in her classroom and teach your kids a simple concept. Enterprise training is a big one. Just being able to put on a headset and walk someone through a real world scenario and try and help them understand what they're going to experience in real life. Construction's a huge one. There's a company that's developing blueprint software, and that sounds really, really boring, but it's really remarkable because they're actually able to translate the blueprints into a 3D model that construction workers can walk into. So the construction worker walks into the model, they grab their materials, and they just start putting it where they need to put it and go step by step by step. So the software can recognize when a step has been completed and then show them, here are these pieces over here, go get this, now take it over here and put it here and do this step by step by step. The early tests of this stuff have shown a 30% cut in the time it takes to build something, and that's pure labor. So if you could tell a developer, hey, I can reduce your labor cost by 30% just by adopting our software and putting these headsets on these guys, who would say no? That's a huge, huge increase in efficiency and cost. Healthcare training is a big one too. You could actually put a surgeon in medical school into a real world scenario where they are operating on a human, real world conditions, things like that. If they mess up, someone could die. So you can put them through those stress tests and things like that and educate them on how to do better. Automotive repair would be a big one. And we're actually trying to develop some things in this space. And what's really exciting about it is you can literally just put on a headset and see what to do, similar to construction. It's a step-by-step thing. Suddenly you're not referencing books, you're not looking at drawings, you're not watching YouTube videos, you're literally just hitting play, and something walks you through how to change your oil. It says reach over here, undo this, put the new one on, step by step by step. So that's all commercial stuff, that's great. A lot of money is going into that space. And actually, if I jump back real quick, there's a really interesting stat here that by 2021, AR will make up $108 billion in the AR/VR market. AR will make up 80% of that market share. Consumer hardware and software is only estimated at $15 billion of that $108 billion. So you can see why the commercial space is going to be where this stuff starts to take off and really expand. But for now, before it does really get to where it could be, we have consumer immersive. And consumer immersive is the stuff that you see now. It's the Snapchat, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, the face filters, all those things. And that's what we're making content for now, is we go in, we work with clients to develop content to reach their consumers. So how do we do that? How do we tell a story inside of the immersive landscape? Because you have how many different ways you could tell it, how many different headsets, how many different platforms, all those things come into play. So you have to understand your audience first and foremost, and that's like any type of marketing campaign or branding campaign or anything like that. You've got to understand who you're trying to speak to and who the audience is. The second part of it, which is just as important, is understanding the format. If you understand your audience, you're going to know what format you need to use to reach that audience. So in identifying the format, then you can get into AR, VR, mixed reality, things like that. And finally, the content. Believe it or not, it is not easy to make this stuff. It's actually really hard. Even though the software and things like that are all becoming available, it's thinking about how to create content for a space that is no longer a 2D plane is a challenge. You have to think about how people are going to interact with it in their physical space. So the process for us to go through and figure these things out is we start with the discovery phase to kind of understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, who we're doing it for, and then we get into creative and dial in what the concept is of the content, and then we get into production, which is really figuring out how to build something. So the discovery's why, who, how are we going to build this thing? Or how are we going to tell this story? The creative is what is the story? What are we trying to think about when we're going to make this stuff? Is it going to be never mind, I won't get into examples. We'll get into examples in a minute. Is it even possible? Is what we're thinking about even possible to do? Because we've run into scenarios where we've gone down a path of having this great idea, and then we get to the point where we're actually starting to think about, okay, creatively, how do we execute this? Realistically, how do we execute this? And then it's like, shit, we can't. We can't do this. The technology is not there. We have so many projects that are on the back burner right now because we're waiting for the tech to get to the point that we can make it happen. So it's kind of this balance game where we're waiting for the tech to catch up to certain ideas. And then production is, once we know we can do it, then we start to figure out what's our process. What are the challenges we're going to face? And more often than not, that ends up with a big fat FML and a lot of crying at night. And I've gone through a lot of hankies and a lot of tears, but we've figured out a lot of stuff over the past couple of years at Wheelhouse. And it's been painful. And there's been times that you really just wanted to run out the window and hope that you didn't make it. But we figured it out. We made it. So that's why it's important to really understand this stuff and to read about it, to watch content about it, to know going in before you say, I want to do VR. Don't immediately fall to that little hole, because it's a death trap, and it can be really easy to fall into. So think about what kind of story you want to tell. Think about the people that you want to reach, and then go figure out what type of experience you want to build. So experiences. So that's enough about the high level stuff. Let's get to the cool shit. Excuse my language, sorry. This gets me excited. So the band St. Motel, I don't know if any of you have heard of them, but they're an indie band based out of LA, a young group, a really sort of pop teen crowd that follows them around. They were interested in building the world's first ever virtual reality music album. And we had caught wind of this a few years ago in talking with their manager. Our executive producer and one of the co-owners of Wheelhouse is friends with the band's manager, and they just happened to catch up in New York one time. They were talking, and we discovered that St. Motel was doing this stuff. So we were like, let us do it. Like, we want to build this for you. And they had already built 3 videos. They were happy with where things were going, but they were sort of running out of money. They were running out of energy. They were running out of the ideas to build this stuff, because creatively it can be absolutely draining to think about how to entertain someone in 360 degrees over the course of 2.5 or 3 minutes. It's exhausting. So how do you do it? Well, we told them we could help. We told them we can help you guys figure this stuff out, but we need to have the ability to go in and be creative with it and figure these things out with you, and not just be told, do this. They totally agreed. They were like, yes, let's try one out. So we said, we'll do one song, and if you guys are happy with it, then we can continue. So we pitched them an idea for their song, Sweet Talk. So going into this project, discovery was already kind of done. The band has an audience of 12 to 13-year-old kids, preteens and teenagers, and they may not be techies, but they'll be interested because the band thinks it's cool. And so they'll check it out because it's their favorite band. It's not necessarily, ooh, I want to try out a headset. It's, ooh, St. Motel did something. I want to check it out. So the content is all 360 animation. So in building the content, we knew 360 was going to be what we were doing, only because the band had sort of set that precedent. It's also extremely available. The content's going to live through YouTube and on an app. You can watch it in the web browser, you can watch it through a headset, and it's going to be used for entertainment and marketing. So really good thing here is that the 360 content has to be energetic or empathetic. Here it's going to be energetic. So we're able to dive into this project without really spending too much time trying to figure out what are we going to do and how are we going to do it. So we were able to really get into creative pretty quick. And what we ended up with is something that the band has actually trademarked this term virtualizer. But what it is, it's a combination of a live concert performance, a lyrical video, and motion graphics and animation around you that augment the experience. So you can go in and you can watch a concert, you can watch a live performance, you can follow along through the lyrics, or you can just kind of gaze at what's happening around you. So in starting Sweet Talk, we wanted to first figure out what the song's about, and it's really about being enchanted regardless of being turned down, and being relevant is better than not being acknowledged. So it's sort of this dichotomy of this character who is sort of chasing this other person, and the other person is maybe like, oh yeah, you're cool, and then this person's like, oh, I love you, and the other person's like, no, like back off. And the song sort of has this tone of like kind of becoming enchanted with something and then it just completely shutting you down. So we wanted to create this dichotomous space for the viewer. And what we did was we put them inside of a desert and this very lifeless, very cold environment. And then we, over the course of the song, have the lyrics actually light up as bright neon signs, very colorful signs, each one designed in a way that kind of tells its own little story, so that all these little interactions are sort of enchanting. But ultimately what happens is this sort of dust storm blows in, the whole thing explodes and goes to black, and you're just sort of left there standing in a dust storm. So we kind of wanted to leave people feeling stranded in the dark. We wanted to keep people moving. We wanted to keep them looking around the video. So we were thinking about that stuff as we're building this, as we're going through creative. How are we going to keep people engaged? How are we going to keep people moving around and not just staring in one direction? You got to think, it's 360 degrees, it's this whole room, nothing can be boring. So once we got into production, we realized that there were a lot of opportunities to improve workflow, to improve and be very efficient on the build and both the render. So rendering a piece of content like this, if you go high end, typically could take anywhere from like 2 to 3 months to render. Now that would be if we do it on our computers in the office. Now if we shipped it out to a render farm, we could get that done faster, but suddenly we're incurring some pretty high costs. And we can't do that with this project. Remember, they're short on money. So how do we do it efficiently and effectively? Well, we switched to a render engine called Octane. And so we built all this stuff in a 3D platform called Cinema 4D. It's a 3D animation tool. And then we use Octane Render to render all the visuals. Benefit about Octane is it runs on graphics cards, which are very inexpensive. So we just buy more graphics cards, put them in more machines, buy more graphics cards, put them in more machines. Suddenly we've scaled up our render farm at a very low cost. And we were actually able to render the entire piece in a little under 2 weeks and get the sort of realism that we wanted out of it, with the lights turning on and all these glows and things interacting with everything else. All that stuff is very processor heavy. So we were able to do this very efficiently and effectively. And all of this stuff is built out just as big 3D objects. We drop it into the set, we build a set, and then we animate everything. So once all that stuff's done, we render it out, we go into After Effects, we go into Premiere, we do some visual effects, we do some sound effects, some music, things like that, and then we kick out a rendered 360 video. Video ultimately ends up on YouTube or within the same Motel app. So we're actually going to take a look at the video itself. So again, one of our biggest challenges was how do we keep people engaged the whole time? And we did that by making the neon signs light up around us and get the viewer to look around.
Stars and hope dreams come
So I didn't mean to turn it down that much. So you can see that the entire video constantly is sort of moving, and it keeps you engaged. And it has a lot of energy with the signs lighting up. It's very colorful, it's bright. But then towards the end here, we have the entire thing sort of implode. The screen's a little dark, so it's kind of hard to see some of the details. But you get the idea. We were able to get users to really look around and experience the content for what it was. If I can get the cursor. So what's really, really cool about this is on YouTube, you can actually track this stuff now. So YouTube, after a certain number of views, will actually start tracking how users are watching the 360 content. And they have what's called a heat map. And what's really cool is what we saw when we watched the Sweet Talk heat map. This is one of the other Saint Motel videos, probably one that has the most motion out of all the other 8 videos between Sweet Talk and this one. So you can see on this video, and these will just play on a loop over and over, that our viewpoints, where people watch the most, are sort of centered around the lyrics and centered around the live performance. They don't really move around. So these hotspots here show what people are watching for the most amount of time. If you look over at Sweet Talk, what we have is the heat map is constantly moving. It's shifting around almost the entire time. And it starts where we want the viewer to start watching, and then you can see as the song progresses and different songs start to light up, or different lyrics light up, pretty soon that heat map is moving, which is a huge victory for us, right? It's like, yes, we got people to do what we wanted them to do and follow the song and follow the lyrics. So the song was actually, the music video itself was actually really successful. And this is really exciting stuff. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the motion design world and this environment, there's a website called Motionographer. Motionographer's been around for a while, and they curate all of the best design, animation, motion content, immersive content, and they only make a couple posts a day, if at all, and they'll do articles that are really in depth about this space. And what's really, really amazing here is that out of all the projects that were submitted for AR and VR for a Motionographer Award, they've been doing these awards for a few years now. Sweet Talk was one of 4 that was nominated for a Motionographer Award, next to a project by CNN, next to a project by Adidas, and a project by Google. So we did it right. We got it right. All the work in trying to figure this stuff out, all the time that we've spent trying to understand it, it worked. People got it. So the success of Sweet Talk led us to developing even more stuff with Saint Motel. After the band saw it, they were like, yes, let's go. Let's finish this album. Let's do it. So we ended up building the entire app for Saint Motel, and we did it in both VR and AR space. So after we did the first piece of content, we then made 6 more 360 videos in the span of about 5 months. And I nearly died. It was brutal. To the point where I had to sleep in the office a number of times to make sure renders didn't die, to hit deadlines. There were publications that were waiting on the videos, so we couldn't miss our deadlines. It was really intense, but it was a lot of fun, and the project itself was really, really cool. So again, we went through our process: discovery, creative, production. How are we going to do it? What are we doing? Who is it for? Really understanding what those things are. And this is a little highlight video of the 360, or excuse me, the out.
Well, hello.
Of the
Welcome
VR
to
album.
The Saint Television Virtual Reality app. Here you'll find a VR experience for every song on the album. Take a look around the pool. You'll see all the songs in chronological order, starting with Move and ending with Happy Accidents, and everything in between. So, pick your song and let's get started.
So it goes through and kind of gives you an idea of what the app is. So I'll stop because you all don't want to watch that again. The next layer of that after the VR piece was the AR piece. So the AR piece was pretty cool too, because we gave people the chance to actually engage with the Saint Motel television.
Once the TV pops up, you can just browse through the channels. In addition to a channel for every song on the album, there are 2 bonus channels.
One is the Travel Channel, which lists our tour dates, and one is the QVC Channel, which has St. Motel merch. Once you choose the channel, the TV will morph into a doorway, and you can walk on through into another world. So, pick your song, and let's get started.
So yeah, it gave fans the ability to actually engage with something that the band had created in a new way and go through and do the videos all over again. But this time you could create a portal and you're physically walking around in your space and you can move around in the videos. It was a really, really cool piece of content. It's still available, so if you want to go download this and check it out, the app is all self-contained as a VR and AR app, so you can go and select which experience you want. You can drop it into a headset. You don't have to drop it into a headset. We really made this available for everybody. So again, just thinking about how you want to reach your audience and how they should engage with it. This app really reflects a lot of what we did there. The last project that I'll talk about real quick is something you might recognize from the promotion for this talk. And we actually created this for Discovery Place. We approached them, I think in March or April. They came to us, and I'll preface that. They came to us asking for some content for social, for their website, things like that. Told us about this dinosaur exhibit, and after we got back to the office, it was one of those moments where it's like, you know, we've got an opportunity here to do something cool. So we went back to them and said, hey, you guys should do this, and this makes sense for you. And we explained it to them, and what this is web AR. So what's really cool about web AR is it's available to pretty much everybody with a modern browser on their phone. And when I say modern browser, we're talking like iOS 9 and higher, which pretty much everyone has. So, and Android, you guys have it too. The opportunity to interact with dinosaurs. And it's like, how cool would that be if you're a kid and could then play with this dinosaur? Like you could go up and run around it, pretend like you're being eaten by the dinosaur and things like that. So we thought about who it would be for. It's for museum patrons and passersby. And it would be played through the web browser and activated by web AR markers. The whole idea was just to extend the dinosaur museum exhibit. So creative, really simple. Drop a dinosaur into your environment and allow users the opportunity to take selfies with the dinosaurs. So as far as production goes, this one was actually fairly simple on the creation side. We found some dinosaurs, we modified them to work for us, and we put them into a Unity engine, and then we're able to sort of process all that stuff into a format that works for web AR. The dev team worked with an open source code called ar.js, and what that allowed us to do is use an existing framework to build on top of how we wanted to do something. So again, that goes back to that thing. We want to do stuff, but the tech's not there. Well, we got to figure out how to get it there. So this is one of the things that we did. We created custom markers that would tie back to the campaign, to the museum, to the dinosaurs, and we built those into the framework, which don't exist. So the devs actually had to work through that a little bit in getting the markers to the point where the phone would actually recognize them, because right now it's built for a very standard marker that says hero on the bottom of it. And you can plug any content into the hero marker, but you have to use the hero marker. Well, we didn't use the hero marker. We broke it, and then we fixed it again and made it work. So the last layer of that was the ability to use multiple dinosaurs on one URL. So users wouldn't have to go to, trex.org or triceratops.org. You went to one URL, you held it up to any marker, and the dinosaur would load and play back. So these are the three markers that we created. Again, typically these come with a little text that says hero at the bottom of it, but our developers were able to make these work. And it really just works off black and white, kind of like a QR code. And it looks at the marker and then uses that as sort of like, here is 0 point in 3D space, and anchor things to this square. Almost like you have a plate of food and everything has to sit on that plate. if anything's off, it kind of breaks. It's kind of the same thing. It's like we need everything to see that plate. We need the food to be on that plate, and then everything will work. And then we can enjoy it. So this was the end result with the dinosaurs. We put one of the dinosaurs out in front of Discovery Place, and so people passing by could just launch the experience. It's a very simple 3-step process, and people could get on the web browser, allow camera access, and see a dinosaur. We didn't do any marketing for this. We didn't promote this in any way. We mentioned it on social. I think Discovery Place mentioned it on social, but the focus was really on users inside the museum. And we didn't have maybe the numbers we wanted, but the numbers that we did have were pretty outstanding. So we had a little over 500 page views in a very short period of time, and each visit was long. We had an average engagement of 2 minutes and 23 seconds per person with the dinosaurs. So if you can imagine trying to convince a marketer to get 2 minutes and 23 seconds of someone's time and how hard that might be to sell them on that, it's like we did it with dinosaurs. That's amazing. So actually, if you want to try it now, you can. So if you take your phone out, the URL is still live, and I'll leave this up at the end of the presentation to try out. But it's really just a 3-step process. It's go to this URL, allow your camera to be able to see the marker, and then point your phone at the marker and a dinosaur shows up. It's too easy, and the results are just fantastic. So this is all great. Where's it all going? And I'll go through this stuff pretty quick, just because I'm not a futurist, I'm not a philosopher, and I will most likely be wrong, but it's good to kind of understand what brands are doing and how this stuff could be used in the future. So content will be very brand focused. So you'll have something like Discovery Place creating dinosaurs for people to interact with. It's like, that's the new content. We're still gonna have our Netflix and movies and things like that, but the stuff that's really gonna engage us is stuff that's tied to a brand and done in a really cool way. So brand experiences that enhance the products that you already own. So something like Lego, and I don't know if anybody watches the Apple keynotes, but Lego has partnered with Apple to develop the new Lego AR app, which when you hold your phone up to a Lego set, the Lego set comes to life. It's like every kid's wildest dream. It's like you build this helicopter, now what? Well, break it, and you destroy it. But now you can make the thing fly. You can literally sit there and have the helicopter lift off and fly it around a room. And that's just a whole nother layer of engagement. How much longer will a kid play with that Lego toy now that they can do that? Other brands that are doing this stuff, you've got IKEA that obviously has their furniture app. And the thing about that is that once we get to the level where you can just kind of walk around and see AR, which would be like the Magic Leap glasses or something like that, pretty soon digital goods will be almost as valuable, if not more valuable, than physical goods. So pretty soon the digital goods landscape completely opens up to whatever you want it to be. And digital goods marketplaces will become a normal thing. It's like you're gonna buy this chair, but you're just gonna look at it and see this chair, but you're gonna have like a really crappy, like real chair that's sitting there, but when you look, it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be like the most beautiful, like Eames chair you've ever seen in your life. And then what will ultimately happen is the brands will start to inject themselves with this content. They'll start to use the AR cloud and AI to understand your environment, to read your environment. So no longer will you have to sort of float your phone around to find a place to drop an AR marker and then interact with content. You'll just hold your phone up. The entire room will be mapped, everything will just work, and there will be very little effort on the side of the user to get it there. Extended brand stories. So traditional advertising will eventually sort of start to fall away as we move away from sort of the 2D screens. Our 2D screens are just gonna kind of fall apart into this 3D space that we can now move around. And what's gonna happen is you'll have hyper-focused brand experiences and content. And a really good example of that is an episode of Modern Family that aired a number of years ago, where it was made entirely with Apple devices. And whether you knew that was happening or not, that was a huge thing for Apple, because who else has done that? Who else has made a television show with mobile devices? And it aired to millions of people. That's a huge accomplishment. So these types of things will become more common. Multi-dimensional UI. and our ability to interact will no longer be restricted to a 2D plane. Again, going back to the 2D screen space suddenly goes away. It's kind of like Tom in Minority Report, but even Tom's still using a 2D screen. He's still working stuff up on this flat plane. What this guy is doing down in the bottom left, he's tapping things on a plane that exists. That's not going to be what happens. What happens is suddenly the entire UI can be 3D. You can interact with things not by scaling them or scrolling. You can step into it and maybe walk down a timeline versus scrolling through a timeline. It's a completely different way of thinking about user experience. And those screens, that content will live everywhere. So the screens go away, you'll see them all the time, will be augmented through glasses or some other device, and you'll be able to see content everywhere, very similar to like Minority Report or WALL-E, where you just kind of walk around and see screens. Again, you're not gonna see screens. That's the best part of this. You're not just gonna see a flat surface. I don't know what it's gonna be, but it's not gonna be flat. So what happens to storytelling? What happens to traditional storytelling? If all this stuff takes over and all the advertising takes over and that's all we have left, well, that's not all we have left. Traditional film will never go away. It's an art form that has been perfected over dozens of years. It is still probably our best way to tell a story in today's time, and it's not just gonna disappear overnight, if ever. The thing about seeing a film, about watching a film, that's gonna change. So again, where you have these screens popping up in places, pretty soon that line's gonna blur. You can step into the film now. You can jump onto the Titanic and you can wave at Leo as he just falls down below the surface of the water. Whether you like him or not, he's gone. So you can be a participant in that. You can sit there and you can give Kate a hug, tell her everything's gonna be okay. She's still got the necklace, she'll be fine. And pretty soon, you're a part of that story. And this isn't gonna be, people talk a lot about choose your own adventure type of concepts, but I think a lot of content will still be passively interactive. It's like you'll be there and you can kind of move around it and work around it, but it's not gonna be something where you're driving a story, because storytellers like to tell their own stories. TVs get replaced with screens, so in a movie theater, you won't have to go to AMC, you'll just flip it on in your headset, sit back and watch a movie at AMC theaters. Sight and sound will continue to evolve, so we've continued to get higher screen resolutions, better audio through smaller devices. Pretty soon our other senses are going to start to get impacted, so you'll have touch, smell, taste, all those things similar to like Disney's XD theaters. And as adoption rates continue to multiply, the content will continue to evolve and just get better and better and better and cooler and cooler. So who's going to make all this stuff? Because it's a lot. If you think about the world as we live now, it's huge. There is so much stuff that humans have built over the past tens, if not thousands of years. And the people that built that were people that lifted stone and picked up steel and hammered things together. It's like the people that build our digital landscape, our digital world, will be in front of a screen for the next 10 years, and then they're going to be stepping inside of it and digitally doing that stuff. But it's going to be people that understand how to make things feel real. And it's not going to be about a guy can swing a hammer. It's going to be about, so what does it look like when a guy swings a hammer? Is he like hitting hard, or is he just kind of like tapping that hammer? Those are things that go through an animator's head. Is how are mannerisms being displayed? How are things happening? Designers, we have to understand this world. So designers are going to be imperative to sort of figuring out how things get communicated. Developers have to build it, and then engineers have to give us the ability to actually step into it and interact with it and break that plane between physical and digital. So I think the biggest thing out of all this stuff is shared experiences. Once we're able to create shared experiences across all these platforms, then I think VR, AR, mixed reality, all these things really do become our normal. And before we can make it our normal, we have to figure out how shared experiences work and how we'll interact with each other inside the digital landscape. So thank you, appreciate it. These are some resources if you want to dive into this stuff a little bit more. But thank you, Brad, and thank you, Scoop, and thank you guys for coming out and listening to me ramble for a little while.